landscape. From Nairobi to Johannesburg, from Lagos to Cairo, from small businesses to large-scale corporates, we take you directly to entrepreneurs making the headlines. I'm G2 Abraham here in the Kenyan capital of Nairobi, where it's 9 p.m. It's 2 p.m. in Washington, D.C. and 2 a.m. in Beijing. Wherever you're joining us from, welcome. Metal workers in South Africa agreed to end the crippling 4-week strike. The World Bank loans Egypt $500 million to develop cheaper gas provisions. And finally, uncertainty as Kenya's tourism industry takes the heat from rising security concerns. We begin in South Africa, where NUMSA members have agreed to end their one-month-long strike in the engineering and manufacturing sectors. Now, the agreement, to be signed tomorrow, includes a 10% increase for the next 3 years for the lowest paid employees. Meanwhile, skilled workers will receive sliding scale increases on labor brokers. A compromise agreement sees the bargaining council employ compliance officers to monitor the act on abuse and non-compliance. NUMSA leaders have told the members to report all for work on Tuesday.
Very happy that finally we have settled the strike and our members have got 10% double digit for a period of 3 years. We think that that need to be celebrated, and we applaud our members for standing together. It means they understand that united we stand, divided we fall. Without their unity, we would not have shifted employers to where they are. We're dealing with a bigger problem here, a problem where government have failed to introduce a national minimum wage that must pay a living wage.
Joining us now with the latest update to the NUMSA talks, we're joined by Angela Coppola, who's with us from Johannesburg. Angela, good news. NUMSA just announced its decision on the wage deal. Can you tell us what they've decided and what this was based on?
Okay, well, you've gone through the highlights of what the agreement actually entailed, but added to that, we've got some other smaller issues that have been resolved. There's also an industry-wide short-time fund that's being created to compensate workers. There's time off for shop stewards so that they can attend to union and industry matters. And then there are opportunities for additional training for members. That was quite a big focus area that NUMSA was sticking on. The issue here, or the fly in the ointment, is the fact that the employer organization, NIASA, isn't happy. We're hearing just a little while ago of talk that NIASA planned to lock out returning NUMSA strikers because their deal, which they put on the table, which they haven't negotiated from, is still set at 8%. Now, the Department of Labour might step in here and try and force NIASA and its members to accept, but NIASA have always indicated that they will consider the legal route. This, unfortunately, will only start playing out tomorrow when we get a clearer picture of what's going on. G2?
Now, CIFSA hinged their wage offer, rather, on the tightening of Section 37, a clause that could restrict unions from renegotiating wages in the future. Could you elaborate on the specifics of this for us?
Okay, well, Section 37, after our briefing last week, Friday, NUMSA met with CIFSA in the afternoon and into the late evening, and they hammered out a compromise. Basically, NUMSA appears to be happy, that's according to Irvin Jim, and the union can negotiate at business level, provided it's not about any of the issues that have been negotiated at National Bargaining Council level. So for the next 3 years, NUMSA can't go to the different businesses and negotiate wages, short time, labor brokers, training issues, and anything that was decided today and will be signed tomorrow. This section, very interestingly, doesn't cover retrenchments. For example, NIASA have always said that they will retrench or start retrenching because they can't afford those increases. So they can actually retrench. There's a section, I think it's a 187, that they can institute, and they can then tell NUMSA that they're planning to retrench. NUMSA then have the right to go on strike. So we might well be back at square two or square one here, G2.
All right, thank you for that. That's Angela Coppola with an update from Johannesburg. Now, moving on, it's almost been a month since BRICS grouping of emerging economies introduced their new development bank, which has been an alternative to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Now, the bank is set up to foster financial and development cooperation amongst Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. However, other countries also want to partner with the group in hopes of boosting their economies. Sahel Ibrahim, the president and CEO of Grey Matter International Limited, has prepared a report for the Egyptian government on how the country can benefit from working with emerging economies and the new development bank. Now, Yasser Hakim had a chance to sit with Ibrahim and some of the benefits of the North African country can get from aligning itself with BRICS nations.
I think it's an excellent initiative that is going to help developing countries, if only because the amounts are needed. You have $2 trillion of annual needs in infrastructure and commercial development financing in developing countries, of which only $1 trillion is actually met. There's a $1 trillion gap in the projects that need financing. At the same time, in the first industrial world, you've got funds that have around 75 trillion almost sitting on the sidelines, that of course have very conservative investment profiles, hence the fact that emerging countries for them are not easy to approach. But right now they're sitting with extremely low yields. So maybe if the new BRICS New Development Bank can ensure projects of very high quality with very good governance, some small portion at least of the 75 trillion can start making its way into emerging markets.
The IMF and the World Bank have a bad reputation in this part of the world, in developing countries. All lending institutions do have, especially with the tough conditions they offer when loaning to developing countries. How different can the new development bank be? Will it be more lenient, or is it just the same?
I am guessing that if this is played right by the BRICS countries, they will want to mark a difference in being maybe slightly less politically prescriptive, because the big pressure often that people are felt, people understand that there need to be frameworks for governance and all that. That's never in dispute. It's just that some of the decisions sometimes are extremely sensitive from the point of view of social and hence political impact. Now we will see if the BRICS countries will be able to craft a new way. I'm sure there'll be conditionalities. There have to be, because it's money is being invested. It's not a charity handout that any bank would come up with.
All right, global financial services firm HSBC has shut down its Nairobi office. Now, the company cited restructuring changes. This is just 3 years after they opened their Kenya branch. Now, the bank had warned that it would cut about 14,000 of its 240,000 global workforce as it continues to struggle with high compliance costs. Now, the Central Bank of Kenya, the industry regulator, says the bank has already started clearing out. HSBC started operations in 2011 in hopes of tapping into the major infrastructure deals in Africa. Meanwhile, other international lenders like JP Morgan Chase, First Rand Bank, and Rabobank Netherlands has opened after HSBC had been strong on regional infrastructure projects, focusing on the need for dams, power, roads, and pipelines across the continent. Looking out the markets that we track here for you to see how they close the day. Let's look now specifically at Nigeria, which closed 0.60% lower at 42,285.85 points. The country's interbank lending rate climbed to 11.12% compared to 10.5% last week after the central bank open market operation drained cash from the system. Coming up, uncertainty as Kenya's tourism industry takes the heat from rising security concerns. And just how proposed laws banning foreign land ownerships will affect the investment climate in South Africa.
Africa is on the move. It's home to 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies.
from small businesses to large-scale enterprises. Hear directly from entrepreneurs behind the story. It's about putting you in the picture so you know where Africa fits in the global context.
Global Business, weekdays at this time on CCTV Africa.
The rebasing of Nigeria's GDP has been a long
Welcome back. You're watching Global Business. Now, the World Bank has approved a $500 million loan for Egyptian gas project. This will increase the usage of the commodity in poverty-stricken areas. Now, the Egyptian household natural gas connection project will seek to replace household consumption of imported liquefied petroleum gas with grid-connected natural gas. Once complete, the project will expand natural gas access to roughly 1.5 million Egyptian households. Piped gas is considered a more convenient cooking fuel. It is also more reliable and has better health and safety ratings. Currently, over 75% of Egypt's households buy LPG cylinders from an inefficient distribution network. The informal market is plagued by persistent shortages and hard-to-handle cylinder containers. Joining us live is Yasser Hakim for more on this. Yasser, by the end of this project, 40% of Egyptian households will be connected to piped natural gas. Now, how will this change affect the lives of those living there?
Well, it affected the lives of the people who already have it, and the problems of the LPG cylinders are immense, are huge. First of all, just to go to the place, the warehouse where they sell it, it's a hassle in itself. You would find thousands maybe of people there fighting over cylinders because usually they're not enough. And then obviously when you have a higher demand and supply, you get a black market where you buy it at double or triple the price, and then you have to have a very heavy LPG cylinder and you have to take it back home, and probably don't have a car. People who use it mostly don't have cars. So it's a big hassle. The people who already have it are saying that it really makes a big difference in their lives. The gas just goes to the house directly without any problems. So it has a social impact, not just an economic one.
Understandably. Now, the country mostly uses imported liquefied petroleum gases, as you said. How will the switch to natural gas offset subsidy cuts that had been made earlier in the year?
Egypt cannot pay any more money for the petrol and diesel and so forth, for the energy prices. It's very expensive. The budget, there's a huge budget deficit. Now the natural gas is a cheaper option. There is more in Egypt. There are reserves of natural gas in Egypt, though there's an abundance to use locally instead of having to import from outside, such for the energy costs. The other type of fuel is used for electricity as well, and for other for energy for the houses, for the plants and factories. But natural gas will be a cheaper and cleaner option and easier option for the government budget-wise. It will help a lot in cutting the subsidies and for expenditure that could, as I understand, would even drop by 30% if more households are using natural gas in the next 5 years.
All right, thank you for that. That's Yasser Hakim joining us live from Cairo. All right, a leading Kenyan chain has disputed official figures for tourist arrivals, saying violent attacks by militant Islamists have scared away far more tourists than authorities are willing to admit. Now, the Kenyan Tourist Board says tourist arrivals in the first 4 months of the year were down 4% from a year earlier, which averaged about 38,000. But now TPS Eastern Africa, which operates the Serena chain hotel, says the figure is much higher than the board is reporting. A survey by the hotel chain showed businesses on the coastal tourism circuit fell by 30 to 50% in the first half of the year compared to last year. Now, while inland trips to destinations such as Masai Mara Game Reserve and Mount Kenya had fallen by almost 20%, tourism is a leading source of foreign exchange for Kenya, but repeated ethnic clashes and terrorist attacks blamed on the Islamist militant group Al-Shabaab has depressed the industry. Tax holidays and exemptions have so far had a negative impact on Uganda's revenue collections. Now, the exemptions were earlier introduced to enhance trade and investment, but collections and GDP ratios sagged on the move. Now, some of the tax hurdles that were removed are payroll taxes, taxes on bank charges and commission, property taxes, air departure taxes, and skills development levies. Revenue Authority Commissioner General says the new policy will now be reversed and some of the exemptions terminated. Cities that the key driver, or sites that the key driver for incentives include infrastructure development, energy markets, and skilled labor force. There's been mixed political reaction to the Southern African government's announcement that it plans to ban foreigners from buying land in the country. But South Africa's Institute of Race Relations says it's little more than political hype, and despite measures by the ANC's government to appease its supporters. Now, for tonight's What's Hot segment, Renee Delcarme begins our analysis on what the law will mean to invest in Africa's second largest economy.
There are 120 million hectares of land in South Africa. Around 85 million hectares are privately owned, and 20 million hectares belong to the state. Only a fraction of South African land is in foreign hands. But this week, South Africa's Rural Development Minister told a media briefing in Cape Town that the country's ruling party, the ANC, wanted to stop foreigners buying land in South Africa in future, and wanted them to lease the land for a minimum of 30 years instead.
It's not a new idea. It's been flighted from time to time really over the past 10 to 15 years. What's changed is the South African government is under immense economic, social and political pressure, far greater pressure than at any point since 1994. And under that pressure, they're using the question of land and they're using the question of the foreign ownership of land to try and make the point to their supporters that they do have their interests at heart and they will do something radical to improve the living standards of those supporters.
The South African government says between 5 and 7% of South Africa's land belongs to foreigners, and its policy to ban foreign land ownership aims to redress the racist apartheid land legislation of the past and further improve the lives of South Africa's black majority. The Institute of Race Relations says while the South African government's plan to ban foreigners from owning land in the country is likely to come as good news for supporters of the ANC ruling party, it's obviously bad news for investors and will have a negative impact in the medium to long term.
The simple question of whether a foreign national can own a beachfront property in South Africa is not going to sink confidence in the South African economy. But the context is far broader than that. And it's a context which says the South African government is not serious about protecting our property rights and therefore our investment in South Africa. And that, in what is an already tough regulatory environment, tough labour environment, will deter future fixed investment within the South African economy.
Renee Delcarme, CCTV, Johannesburg.
Joining us for more analysis on this, we are now joined by Miriam Bernard, who's live for us from London. Miriam, the Regulations of Land Holding Bill is just one of the number of reform bills that President Jacob Zuma's government hopes to sign into law by the end of his term in 2019. How are investors responding to this on your end?
Well, G2, many investors I spoke with on this end are surprised at the proposed law, especially since the number of Western and Asian investors is still quite small. In fact, analysts say that foreign nationals own only about 4% of that land, and there's been a 1% increase in the last 4 or 5 years off the back of a depreciating rand that's made South African property more attractive to those buyers with pounds, euros, and of course dollars. Although there hasn't been official opposition to the new proposed law, many experts are suggesting that the current willing buyer, willing seller system should be revised, and the government could actually take a more moderate position rather than possibly ban all foreign ownership in the next 5 years. And the idea of a 30-year minimum lease is also one that could be developed to actually offer incentives to both local and foreign owners.
Miriam, there has been a noted trend in Africa, governments that are seeking to protect local investors, a key example being in Zimbabwe. Now, what do you think is driving African countries to adopt such policies, which some may argue are protectionist policies?
I mean, we can certainly see many countries adopting more protectionist policies when it comes to land ownership. Certainly in the US and Europe, European countries as well, there are criteria for owning real estate and caps on how much foreigners can actually own. But across the African continent, of course, it's a very different issue. And we know that, with analysts suggesting that governments should try to reform the land ownership laws that overlooked the rights, of course, of the locals for decades in countries like South Africa and Zimbabwe. And despite the long-term impact still being very uncertain, these reforms could help reduce the land disparities and help boost domestic activity and, of course, growth. And let's not forget that the other recent bill that was presented, wholesale redistribution of half of all farmlands to farm workers who have been employed for 10 years or more by their landowners. All of these are in efforts to provide incentives for local workers, local farmers and landowners to revive the economy from within.
Miriam, a land reform minister has said that President Jacob Zuma does not support this particular approach, but he does support the initiative. Now, where does he make the distinction?
Well, it's difficult to say. Again, many analysts on this end are looking to see what the details of this particular law will be. And those distinctions are exactly what it is that we'll be looking for, to see whether or not there's specific areas, how foreign owners can proceed forward, and how foreign owners at this point will be impacted by the new law as well.
All right, thank you for that. That's Miriam Bamar joining us live from London. Now we take a look at commodity prices for the day. Specifically, let's look at Brent crude, which slipped below $108 a barrel, although analysts say falls may be limited. And when we come back, after decades of war, a Somali entrepreneur tells us the story of how commerce is changing the face of his country.
Biz Asia. Asia means business.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Business. Now, after more than 2 decades of war, Somalia is witnessing great change. The country's economy is now stabilizing, and many citizens who fled the war are returning home as investors. Today on Grassroots, we meet one of those returnees, Adiris Hussein Abdi. Since 2011, Abdi has been on a mission to set up Somalia's Walmart.
My name is Idrus Hussein Ahmed. When I was maybe 10 years or 8 years old, the civil war broke out. My family, they fled out from Mogadishu to Afgoye, somewhere not far, 30 kilometers from here. August 19, I came back here, 2011. Then I got this premises. That time, it was the only house that is repaired for here. All the other was destroyed. The reason I changed it back to here, number one, I see there's a piece, at least some improvement of the piece. Not complete, but it's a little something that we can work. Number two, to contribute the country rebuilding. We born here, we learn here, we grow here, we are creating an environment for our people. The purchasing power of the people is coming back. Especially it contributes by diaspora. They're coming back with the money. Then at least this day, before we have a problem for purchasing power, the people was price conscious, but these days they become quality oriented. This area is the for ladies scarf, sorry, for ladies mainly. And now today we are making expansion, another expansion for here for ladies. Because before we are selling men only, but right now we add more in the ladies. Because they are buy a lot compared to the men. So they are a huge customer, a huge market to target. Okay, one time we are expecting to be the Walmart of Mogadishu. For me,
Samsung S3, Classic S3.
Do you know this one? The Classic S3 and Classic S2. And no one will think that Somali man will buy $600 or $700 a phone to buy it. But now they become the normal to buy it. Okay. When you open a business, that means you are giving our taxes for the government. You are creating return for the investors. You are giving employment for the people. You are contributing the social welfare. So that's sometimes when you start a business, you are not only feeling that you are only getting money to your pocket. Also, you have to have social responsibility.
Looking now at how your money is trading, let's look at the Kenyan shilling, which strengthened marginally against the dollar, while the benchmark shares index was a little changed. And the South African rand ended slightly firmer to the dollar, although it struggled to find momentum given the lack of market-moving news. And just before we go, coming up on Global Business tomorrow, we explore the real estate industry in Ethiopia. Now, despite record economic growth, home ownership remains a nightmare. With low income and non-existing mortgage system, the sector struggles. That and more on Global Business tomorrow. That's it for this edition of Global Business. Remember, you can send us your feedback to Global Business Africa at cctv.com. You can visit our Facebook page, CCTV Africa. You can also stay in touch with Global Business on Twitter using the handle at CCTV News Africa. I'm G2 Abraham. Thanks for watching.